Welcome back to Fear Begins Tonight. I am going to take you down a path most travelers would rather avoid. The open road carries with it a kind of freedom, the kind that makes people roll down their windows, crank up the music, and imagine nothing could possibly go wrong. But the truth is, highways and backroads have their own shadows, places where headlights catch something you cannot explain, where the silence of a long stretch is broken by a sound that makes your stomach twist. These are not just stories of flat tires or wrong turns. These are true accounts of road trips that turned into nightmares, the kind of journeys that leave people shaken for the rest of their lives. So buckle up, dim the lights, and if you dare, listen closely, because these are 7 scary road trip horror stories that ended in pure terror. The first story begins on a humid summer night in Tennessee. I had been on the road for hours, driving a used Ford pickup that rattled whenever it went over 50. My girlfriend at the time, Alicia, sat in the passenger seat with her feet on the dashboard, scrolling through her phone with the absent-minded boredom of someone who had been staring at mile markers all day. We were headed to Nashville from Atlanta, a trip that should have been simple, just under 4 hours. But it was already pushing into the 7th hour. Traffic, accidents, and construction zones had slowed us down, and by the time we finally broke free of the city sprawl, night had fallen. The GPS was stubborn, rerouting us off the interstate and down a narrow 2-lane highway that twisted into the hills. There were no streetlights, no cars behind us, no cars ahead. Just darkness pressing against the glass and the occasional flash of a mailbox or a broken fence post. The truck's headlights were weak, throwing out 2 cones of yellow that looked swallowed by the night instead of piercing it. Alicia had dozed off, her phone slipping down between the seat and door. The silence in the cab was heavy, broken only by the steady hum of the tires. I leaned forward, trying to shake off the exhaustion that had begun to settle behind my eyes. When I caught movement at the edge of the road, a figure, at first I thought it was a deer. But as the truck closed the distance, the shape didn't scatter into the trees. It stayed there on the shoulder, standing. My stomach tightened. It was a person, a man. He was tall, rail-thin, dressed in what looked like a long coat that hung to his knees. His hair was long and stringy. His head tilted at an odd angle, like his neck couldn't quite hold the weight. But it was his face that made me grip the wheel tighter. Pale, almost white in the headlights, with features that didn't seem to sit right. His eyes reflected like an animal's, catching the beams and throwing them back in dull yellow. I slowed down, instincts warring in my chest. One part of me wanted to stop to see if he needed help, but another part, a louder part, screamed to keep driving. I glanced at Alicia. She was still asleep, her breathing soft as we passed him. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see he didn't move. He didn't raise a hand or step back. He just watched us, head cocked, eyes glinting. And then impossibly he smiled, not a small, polite smile, a wide, unnatural stretch that pulled his mouth too far, teeth flashing in the dim light. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, and without meaning to, I pressed harder on the gas. The truck lurched forward when I looked into the rearview mirror, expecting to see him shrinking into the darkness. My heart nearly stopped. He wasn't in the same spot anymore. He was in the middle of the road, directly behind us. Standing dead center in the lane, there was no way he could have moved that fast. The truck's tail lights faded him into shadow, but I knew he was there. I could feel his gaze burning into the back of my head. I shook Alicia awake. "What?" she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "There's someone on the road," I said, my voice low, tense. She sat up, looked out the back window, then at me. "I don't see anyone." When I risked another glance, the road was empty, just black asphalt stretching into the distance. "Swear to God he was right there," I whispered. Alicia gave me a skeptical look but didn't press. She leaned back in her seat, muttering something about me needing caffeine. I tried to laugh it off, but the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. For a while, nothing happened. The highway wound deeper into the hills, cutting through stretches of dense forest that pressed right up against the asphalt. The air felt heavier, and the shadows between the trees seemed darker than before, almost solid. Then, just as I started convincing myself I had imagined it, Alicia gasped, "Did you see that?" she hissed, pointing to her side of the road. I glanced over and my chest turned cold. There he was, the same man. He was standing at the tree line, only a few feet from the road, coat hanging limp, head cocked at that same grotesque angle. We passed him quickly, but when I looked ahead, My stomach dropped again. Another figure, same coat, same crooked head, standing just ahead on the opposite side. And then another, and another, every few hundred feet. Another pale figure stood watching us, each one nearly identical to the last. The truck's headlights caught glimpses of their faces, all smiling that same awful, stretched smile, all eyes reflecting yellow. Alicia clutched my arm. "What the hell is this?" "I don't know," I whispered. Pressing harder on the accelerator, the truck groaned, but we pushed past 60, then 70. My hands were slick with sweat, my pulse hammering in my throat. The road curved sharply, and for a brief moment, the headlights swept across a clearing. Dozens of them stood there, not just one or two, dozens, all lined up in the trees, all facing the road, all smiling. I don't remember the next few minutes clearly. My vision tunneled, my hands gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping me alive. Alicia was crying, begging me to drive faster. Faster, faster, I did, when we finally saw the glow of a gas station ahead. It felt like a mirage. I pulled in hard, the truck shuddering to a stop under the buzzing fluorescent lights. Alicia jumped out before I even turned off the ignition. She stood there shaking, arms wrapped around herself. I got out slowly, scanning the dark edges of the lot. Nothing, no figures, no pale faces. Just the hum of the lights and the smell of diesel. We went inside, grabbed water, and sat at a table near the coffee machines, not saying a word for nearly half an hour. When we finally got back in the truck, Alicia refused to look out the windows. The rest of the drive into Nashville was uneventful, but even now, years later, I cannot shake the image of those pale faces in the trees, their smiles carved into my memory like scars. To this day, I never take that route again. The second story takes us west, along a desolate stretch of road cutting through the deserts of New Mexico. It was supposed to be a trip full of freedom, laughter, and a little bit of reckless adventure. 3 friends, all in their early 20s, packed into a rusty blue Honda Civic with peeling paint and a trunk that barely closed. They were heading from Albuquerque to Phoenix, a route that promised long stretches of highway and views that felt endless. The car was stuffed with snacks, cheap energy drinks, and a playlist blasting through half-broken speakers. The driver, Eric, was the kind of guy who always claimed he knew better than the GPS. In the passenger seat sat Ryan, his cousin, who kept fiddling with the map app on his phone despite Eric swearing he knew a shortcut. In the back, sprawled across a mess of blankets and backpacks, was Mia, Ryan's girlfriend, who had agreed to tag along against her better judgment. At first, the drive was fun. They sang along to old songs, cracked jokes, and passed around a bag of chips until the sun began to set. But as the daylight drained, the desert transformed. The wide-open beauty that stretched on forever became an ocean of shadows, the horizon fading into nothingness. The road itself narrowed, cracked, and then eventually turned into a 2-lane highway with faded lines barely visible under the Civic's dim headlights. Ryan grew uneasy. "This does not look like the main route," he said. Squinting at the map, Eric just laughed, drumming his fingers on the wheel. "Relax, this'll cut off at least an hour. I've been here before." But the silence outside the car was unsettling. No gas stations, no signs of life, just endless dirt, scrub brush, and the occasional hulking silhouette of a boulder. The road was so empty that even when they killed the music, there was a buzzing in their ears, the kind of quiet that presses in until it feels like it is crawling under your skin. Mia sat up, hugging her knees. "When was the last time we saw another car?" Ryan checked his phone. No service. He held it up, waved it around, but the screen remained blank. "This is bad," he muttered. The highway stretched forward like a ribbon into the dark. The Civic's headlights caught something ahead, a shape in the middle of the road. Eric slowed, squinting. At first, it looked like debris, maybe a tire. But as they approached, the shape took on definition. It was a deer, or what was left of one. The animal lay twisted, broken, ribs jutting out like splintered branches. But what made them all draw in sharp breaths was the way its head had been turned, almost completely backward, as if snapped and placed deliberately. Mia gagged and turned away. Ryan swore under his breath. Eric tightened his grip on the wheel but didn't stop. He eased the car around the carcass and accelerated. Though his jaw had gone tight, "Coyotes maybe," he said quickly, though his voice held no conviction. They drove on, silence heavier than before. Minutes passed, then the headlights caught something else. Another deer, this one laid across the shoulder, legs splayed at unnatural angles, chest cavity ripped open. Its head too was twisted the wrong way. Then another and another every mile or so. Another broken animal, deer, coyotes, even a jackrabbit with its body torn nearly in half. Its head turned completely around, Mia whispered. "This isn't right." "Something's doing this," Eric swallowed but said nothing. Ryan glanced nervously into the dark desert beyond the windows, as if expecting something to leap from the blackness. The road grew narrower, cracked asphalt giving way to patches of dirt. The headlights flickered as if the electrical system was straining. And then up ahead they saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. Eric slowed the car to a crawl. The shape was tall, thin, motionless. As the headlights closed the distance, the figure resolved into something that made their stomachs twist. It was a man, but not quite. His skin looked gray, dry, stretched too tightly over his bones. His clothes were ragged, barely hanging on him, and his head lolled backward, neck bent at an impossible angle, as though it had been broken and left that way. Yet he stood perfectly upright. His eyes reflected pale white in the beams of the Civic's lights. His mouth opened slowly, revealing a wide, dark gap that seemed too large, teeth jagged, uneven. He didn't move. He didn't blink. Eric swore and slammed his foot on the gas. The Civic roared forward, swerving around the figure. For a moment, relief washed over them as they passed. Then Ryan screamed. The man was gone. Not behind them on the road, not in the mirrors, gone. Eric gripped the wheel, eyes darting wildly. Mia clutched Ryan's arm, her nails digging into his skin. Where did he go? Nobody answered. For the next mile, they kept expecting to see him again. The desert stretched endlessly around them, shadows reaching toward the road. Then, without warning, the car jolted hard. The rear tires thumped violently, and Eric fought to keep control. They had run over something. Eric pulled the car onto the shoulder, gravel crunching beneath the tires. The Civic shuddered and stopped. He killed the engine. Silence pressed in immediately, so heavy it felt alive. Flat tire, Eric muttered, forcing calm. He grabbed the flashlight from the glove box, though his hands trembled. "I'll change it fast." Ryan turned in his seat. "Don't. Stay in the car," but Eric had already stepped out. The desert air was thick, warm, carrying with it a smell he couldn't place. Not dust, not sagebrush. Something sweet, metallic, something like blood. He clicked the flashlight on, the beam cutting into the darkness. The rear tire was shredded, rubber hanging in strips. But what made his stomach drop was the gouge along the sidewall. Long, deep, like it had been cut deliberately. "Guys," he whispered. Something moved in the dark. The flashlight beam swung wildly, catching glimpses of dry brush and dirt. Then it landed on something pale, a face, the man. Standing less than 20 feet away, head still bent unnaturally, mouth still open in that too wide gape. His eyes glowed in the light. Eric stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. "Get out of the car, now!" he screamed. Mia yanked open her door, Ryan right behind her. They ran to Eric's side as the man began to move. Not walking, not running, jerking, twitching. His limbs snapped into motion as though invisible strings were yanking him forward. His head lolled side to side, bones cracking with each motion. The three of them bolted into the desert, away from the car, away from the road. The ground was uneven, rocks cutting into their shoes. But adrenaline pushed them faster. Behind them, the sound of scraping. Not footsteps. Something dragging, something inhuman. Mia sobbed. Ryan shouting for them to keep running. Eric didn't look back. They ran until their lungs burned. Until the road was just a faint line behind them. Finally, they collapsed near a dry wash, huddling together, gasping for breath. The desert was silent again. Too silent. Eric risked shining the flashlight back toward the road. Nothing. The Civic sat there, its hazard lights blinking weakly. The figure was gone. They waited. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, when the horizon began to glow faintly with the first hints of dawn, they dared to move again. When they returned to the car, the tire was still shredded. But the strangest part, the gouge was gone. The rubber was shredded, yes, but the long, deliberate slash Eric had seen earlier had somehow disappeared. As though the tire had simply worn out. They didn't wait to figure it out. With the spare thrown on, they sped toward the interstate. not speaking, not daring to look back. None of them ever took that shortcut again. And Eric swears that to this day, sometimes when he closes his eyes at night, he still hears the sound of something dragging, following him just out of sight. There is something about the highway at 3 in the morning that feels wrong. The rest of the world is asleep, and you begin to realize just how alone you are. The gas stations that remain open buzz under sickly fluorescent lights, the attendants staring at you with hollow eyes as though they know something you don't. The road ahead looks endless, swallowed by the dark, and every shadow outside your headlights begins to move in your imagination. You start to wonder how many people vanish out here, gone without a trace, and how long it would take before anyone even noticed. That was the exact feeling Lucas had as he pushed his Jeep further west on Interstate 80, cutting through the barren stretch of Nevada desert. He had been on the road for 10 hours straight, leaving Denver behind on his way to San Francisco, chasing a new job and a new start. His belongings were crammed into the back, boxes rattling with every bump. The only sound was the hum of the tires and the faint whistle of wind leaking through the cracked passenger window. His phone had no signal. The radio picked up nothing but static, and the GPS had been frozen for the last 40 miles. The road itself felt abandoned. No headlights in either direction. No exit signs, no billboards, just endless desert that seemed to pull him deeper into its emptiness. The Jeep's fuel gauge dipped lower than he liked. He told himself he would find a station soon, but his gut churned uneasily. When the gas light finally blinked on, he cursed under his breath. That was when he saw the sign, a small, weather-beaten board on the side of the highway, illuminated only by his headlights. It read, "Gas, food, motel." 12 miles. Relief washed over him. He tightened his grip on the wheel, pressing a little harder on the gas, anxious to see the glow of neon lights on the horizon. But 12 miles came and went, and there was nothing. No lights, no exit, no buildings, just the same endless ribbon of asphalt. He told himself maybe the sign had been old. Maybe the station had closed down still. He felt something stir in his stomach, a slow unease that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Another 10 minutes passed before he finally spotted something up ahead. A faint glow, low to the ground, flickering weakly against the horizon. As he drew closer, the shape of a gas station emerged. Small, isolated, a single pump sitting under a sagging canopy, its lights buzzing in the night. Behind it stood a squat building with peeling paint, a flickering neon sign in the window that spelled out "Open" in tired red letters. Lucas exhaled, the tension in his chest easing slightly. He pulled into the lot, gravel crunching beneath his tires. The pump looked ancient, its paint chipped, the numbers faded, but it worked. He slid his card, heard the click of the mechanism, and began to fill the tank. That was when he noticed the silence. Out here, there should have been wind, the sound of desert insects, the distant hum of the highway. Instead, there was nothing, dead quiet, as though the world itself had stopped breathing. He glanced toward the station window. A man stood behind the counter, half shrouded in shadow. He didn't move, didn't wave, just stood there, staring out at Lucas with an expressionless face. Lucas shifted uncomfortably. He tried to focus on the pump, willing it to fill faster. His eyes flicked back to the window. The man was gone. A soft chill crept down his spine. He looked around the lot. No movement, no sound. Just the flicker of the neon sign and the buzz of the canopy light above him. The pump clicked, signaling the tank was full. Lucas replaced the nozzle, got back into the Jeep and started the engine. He told himself he would skip going inside, that he didn't need snacks or coffee that badly. But then in his mirror he saw the man. Standing just outside the station door, the figure was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in what looked like a dark uniform. But his head was tilted in a way that made Lucas's stomach turn, bent slightly to the side, too stiff, like a doll's neck twisted until it nearly snapped. Lucas shifted the Jeep into drive. He didn't care about politeness, didn't care about paying cash inside. He just wanted out. He pulled forward, heading toward the exit. But as his headlights swept across the lot, his breath caught in his throat. There were more figures, at least half a dozen, standing at the edges of the gravel, just beyond the reach of the light. Their clothes were ragged, their faces pale, all of them with heads bent at strange, unnatural angles, all of them staring at him. Lucas's pulse spiked. He floored the gas. the Jeep jerking forward. The figures didn't move, didn't chase. They just watched as he tore down the highway, his hands trembling on the wheel. For a while, it seemed he had escaped. The glow of the station faded behind him. Swallowed by darkness, he drove faster than he should have, the Jeep rattling dangerously. Every mile he put between himself and that place felt like survival, but then he saw it, up ahead. Just off the shoulder of the road, another gas station. Identical, same sagging canopy, same single pump, same flickering neon sign. Lucas's breath stuttered. He slammed his foot on the brake, tires screeching as the Jeep skidded to a halt. Dust billowed into the night air. He sat there, frozen, staring at the impossible sight. The station was the same. Not similar, not a coincidence. The same, and in the window a figure stood watching. He didn't remember turning the Jeep around. Didn't remember the panic that rose in his chest. All he knew was that he was suddenly speeding in the opposite direction. Hands slick on the wheel, eyes darting wildly at the empty desert around him. But the farther he drove, the worse it got. Every 10 miles, another station, another neon sign. Another set of figures with broken necks staring at him from the shadows. It was like a loop, an endless trap he couldn't escape. The fuel gauge dipped lower again and his throat went dry. He knew he couldn't keep driving forever. The last thing Lucas remembered clearly was pulling into one of the stations. Headlights sweeping over a dozen figures gathered in the lot, their heads bent in unison as though waiting for him. When he woke up, it was morning. His Jeep sat parked on the side of the interstate. Fuel gauge full, engine off. He was slumped over the wheel, the sun glaring into his eyes. There was no gas station, no neon sign, no figures, just empty desert stretching endlessly around him. To this day, Lucas never tells the story without shaking. Because when he got out of the Jeep that morning, stretching his stiff legs, he noticed something etched into the dirt beside his tire tracks, dozens of footprints leading nowhere. There is a point on long road trips where fatigue does not just make you tired. It begins to twist reality. The lines on the highway blur. The rumble of the tires becomes hypnotic, and your thoughts slip between dreams and consciousness. That was the state Jenna found herself in as she crossed through the Ozarks late one summer night. She had been driving since early morning, the trunk of her car stacked with boxes. Moving from Chicago to Dallas for a fresh start after a messy breakup, the highway was nearly empty, winding through the dense hills and forests. Her headlights barely pierced the thick dark, revealing only the guardrails and the faint suggestion of trees closing in around her. The radio had died hours ago, the only stations dissolving into static, so she kept herself awake by sipping lukewarm coffee and humming softly. Around midnight, a storm rolled in. The first drops hit the windshield like cold fingers. Then the rain came hard, drumming against the roof in sheets. Her wipers screeched as they fought to keep up. She slowed, leaning forward, peering into the distorted tunnel of her headlights. That was when she saw it. A flash of movement at the edge of the road. A figure standing just beyond the guardrail. Soaked clothes plastered to its body, head bent low as if staring at the ground. Jenna's breath caught. She tapped the brakes, unsure if she had imagined it. The storm made everything fluid and shifting, but then the figure moved, slowly raising its head, turning toward her. Even through the blur of rain, she saw its face. It was wrong. The proportions slightly off, the features blurred as if unfinished. No eyes, no mouth. Just the faint suggestion of a human shape carved into pale skin. Jenna's pulse spiked. She pressed the accelerator, desperate to put distance between herself and whatever she had seen. Her tires hissed across the wet asphalt as she sped through the storm. But only a mile later, another figure appeared, identical, standing by the guardrail, facing her. She gripped the wheel tighter, her knuckles turned white. Another mile, another figure, and then another. It was as if they were stationed at intervals along the road, each one closer, each one watching with their blank, unfinished faces. Her breath came in sharp gasps. She wanted to believe it was a trick of exhaustion, a hallucination from too much caffeine and too little sleep. But when her headlights passed over the next figure, she saw water dripping from its form, real, physical, and its head tilted slightly as though following her car. Her chest tightened, the rain hammered harder. She felt trapped in the storm, the highway twisting endlessly, figures waiting around every bend. Then the car shuddered. The engine light blinked. No. she muttered, slamming her palm against the wheel. The car coughed, lurched, and then died, coasting to a stop on the shoulder. The headlights dimmed, the wipers froze mid-swipe. Only the pounding of the rain remained. Jenna sat frozen, hands trembling. She looked in the rearview mirror. One of the figures stood behind her car. Her throat closed. She fumbled for her phone, praying for a signal. Nothing. The screen mocked her with a single word. No service? The figure didn't move. It just stood there in the storm, water cascading down its faceless form. Then came the sound, a soft scrape against the passenger side window. Slow, deliberate, Jenna's head whipped to the side. Another figure stood there, hand pressed against the glass. The fingers were too long, the joints bent strangely, like someone had stretched them beyond their limits. She locked the doors, heart pounding so hard she felt it in her teeth. The figure leaned closer to the glass, though it had no eyes to see her with. The outline of its face pressed against the window, skin sliding across the glass as though testing it. She squeezed her eyes shut, whispered prayers she had not spoken since childhood. The scraping stopped. When she opened her eyes, the figure was gone. So was the one in the mirror. She sat in silence, barely daring to breathe. The storm continued, but the road felt emptier somehow, the air heavier. Then, slowly, she realized something. The sound of the rain was wrong. It wasn't just water hitting the roof anymore. There was a second rhythm beneath it, a heavier, duller thud like footsteps on the roof. Jenna's scream caught in her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't think. The sound shifted, moving toward the driver's side. Something heavy dragged across the metal. Sliding downward, she fumbled for the keys, twisting them desperately. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. Relief burst through her chest. She slammed the gear into drive, tires spinning on the wet shoulder before catching traction. The car lurched forward. She didn't look back, didn't dare. For miles, she drove blind with fear. The storm swallowing the road, her hands locked on the wheel. Finally, after what felt like hours, she saw lights up ahead. A rest stop, bright, artificial, blessedly normal. She pulled in, shaking so hard she could barely park straight. The rain slowed, the storm breaking apart. She sat there, sobbing quietly, hands gripping the wheel. She thought she had escaped, but when she finally glanced at the back seat, her heart stopped. The seat was soaked. Water pooled on the upholstery, dripping down onto the floor mats. And faintly, in the condensation on the inside of the rear window, a single word had been traced by a finger. Die. The open highway is not always as empty as it seems. You think you are alone out there, but sometimes someone is following, keeping pace just out of sight, waiting for you to notice. The worst part is when you finally realize they have been there much longer than you thought. That was the exact dread that filled Marcus and his girlfriend Tasha during what was supposed to be a simple weekend drive across Nevada. The two had borrowed Marcus's uncle's old pickup truck for a road trip, hoping to camp out by one of the remote lakes tucked deep in the desert. It was meant to be their escape from the noise of the city. Just open road, empty skies, and no distractions. For the first few hours, everything was fine. They blasted music, cracked jokes, and made up stories about the abandoned motels and shuttered diners they passed. But then Tasha noticed something strange. Behind them, half a mile back, was a white sedan. At first it seemed ordinary. Cars passed now and then, but this one never passed. It stayed exactly the same distance no matter what Marcus did. When he slowed, it slowed. When he sped up, it sped up. At first he laughed it off, saying it was just another traveler heading in the same direction. But as the sun dropped lower and the roads grew emptier, the car's persistence began to feel deliberate. Maybe they are going to the same lake, Tasha suggested nervously, though her voice betrayed her doubt. Marcus muttered that he would take the next exit to see if the car followed. The next exit led to nothing but a cracked old road leading to a cluster of boarded-up buildings. Marcus pulled off anyway. The white sedan followed. By now, Tasha was gripping the door handle tight, whispering that they needed to turn back. But Marcus's pride got in the way. He drove further down the crumbling road, convinced he could lose the follower, but the sedan crept closer, closing the distance at a slow, steady pace. When Marcus stopped the truck and threw it into reverse, the sedan also stopped, its headlights glaring like unblinking eyes. For what felt like hours, the two vehicles sat there in silence, engines idling, dust swirling in the dimming light. Finally, Marcus decided to confront them. He opened the door, stepped out, and shouted across the road. Demanding to know what they wanted, the sedan did not respond. Its engine cut off, the headlights went out, and then, almost impossibly, the driver's door opened. Someone stepped out, tall and thin. Their outline stretched long against the sunset, but instead of approaching, the figure simply stood there, watching Marcus. Tasha screamed for him to get back inside, and the sight was so unsettling that Marcus obeyed. He slammed the door shut, threw the truck into gear, and sped off back toward the highway. The white sedan did not follow, in fact, when they glanced back. The road behind them was completely empty, no headlights, no trace of a vehicle. When they finally made it to the lake, Marcus swore he would never take a back road again. Tasha said nothing, but she kept glancing at the rearview mirror all night long. What makes road trips terrifying is not just the strange people you might encounter, but the places you sometimes find yourself stranded in. For Amy, a college student traveling from Illinois to Colorado, it was a desolate stretch of highway and a broken-down car that turned her trip into something she could not forget. Her little sedan gave out just past midnight, leaving her alone on the shoulder of a deserted road, surrounded by miles of nothing but fields. She tried calling for help, but her phone battery had been draining all day, and by the time she got through to a roadside service line, the phone died. The silence was overwhelming. No passing cars, no houses in sight, just the occasional rustle of wind through the grass. After half an hour of sitting in the dark, Amy noticed lights approaching in the distance. Relief washed over her as she saw a pickup truck slowing down and pulling over behind her. A man stepped out, middle-aged, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He asked if she needed help. She hesitated, uneasy at the thought of being alone with a stranger, but his calm tone put her slightly at ease. He offered to check under the hood. She let him, but as he leaned over the engine, something felt wrong. He seemed to fiddle without purpose. Muttering to himself, after a while he turned to her and said the problem was serious, and that she should ride with him to the nearest town. She declined, insisting she would wait for roadside service. His smile froze in place. Then he leaned closer and whispered, "There is no service out here. They are not coming." Fear surged through her. She backed away, stammering that she would figure it out. The man's eyes narrowed, his smile twisting into something far less friendly. Then he said, "Suit yourself," and walked back to his truck. Instead of driving away, he parked right behind her, leaving his headlights on, illuminating her broken-down car like it was pinned on a stage. Minutes passed, he did not move. He just sat there in his truck, watching her. Amy locked the doors and tried not to cry. Eventually, another set of headlights appeared down the road. Another car was coming as soon as the man saw it. He gunned his engine, swerved around her, and sped off into the night. The passing vehicle, a family in a minivan, slowed to check if she was okay, and the sight of those friendly faces nearly broke her. They let her use their phone to call for help, and she rode with them until the tow truck arrived. She never saw the strange man again, but she often wonders what might have happened if that second car had not shown up. Sometimes the nightmare of the open road is not about strangers at all. Sometimes it is about the road itself. Jake and his two friends were driving through Kentucky late at night when they decided to take a scenic route through the hills. Their GPS warned them about poor service, but they ignored it. The road was narrow, winding, and completely empty. They were laughing, making jokes about horror movies, when suddenly they came across something that silenced them all. In the middle of the road lay a deer, motionless. But it was not just the deer that unsettled them. Standing just a few feet away was a man. He was barefoot, dressed in dirty jeans and a torn shirt, and he was staring directly at their car. Jake slowed, unsure what to do. The man did not move. He did not wave for help. He just stared, his head slightly tilted. Finally, Jake decided to swerve around and keep driving, but as the headlights swept past, he realized the man's eyes were wide open, unblinking, and his mouth was stretched into a grin that did not look human. They did not stop. They did not even speak for several miles. When they finally dared to glance back, the road was empty. No man, no deer, nothing. Just endless darkness swallowing everything behind them. There is something deeply unsettling about gas stations on empty highways. They are supposed to be a safe haven, but when the wrong kind of silence fills them, they can feel like traps instead. That was the feeling Sarah and her younger brother Daniel had one summer night when they pulled off to refuel on their way from Texas to Arizona. The station was lit by a few buzzing fluorescent bulbs, but the parking lot was otherwise deserted. No cars, no other travelers, just a lone attendant inside who did not even look up when they entered. Sarah pumped gas while Daniel went inside to buy drinks. She noticed the way the man behind the counter seemed almost too still, watching Daniel out of the corner of his eye while pretending to read a newspaper. When Sarah came in a few minutes later, she felt the heavy weight of his gaze too. Daniel picked a couple of sodas and placed them on the counter. The man finally spoke, his voice low and hoarse. "You kids traveling far?" he asked. Sarah hesitated before answering, giving only a vague reply. The man nodded slowly, as if he already knew then, without ringing up the drinks. He leaned closer and whispered something that made Sarah's skin crawl. "You should not go west tonight. The road is wrong after dark." Daniel laughed nervously, thinking the man was trying to spook them, but Sarah felt her stomach knot. The man finally scanned their items, bagged them, and handed them over without another word. When they walked back to the car, Sarah realized her brother was pale, his hands shaking. "What did he say to you when I was outside?" she asked. Daniel looked away, then muttered, "He told me he has seen people take that road and never come back." They got into the car quickly, eager to leave, but as they pulled out of the station, Sarah glanced back and froze. The man was standing outside now, in the doorway, watching them drive away. He raised his hand, not in a wave, but in a slow, deliberate gesture, pointing west, the exact direction they were headed. Sarah pressed her foot harder on the gas pedal. She never forgot the warning. But she also never told Daniel that in the weeks following their trip, she dreamed of that man almost every night. Always pointing, always watching. The road has a way of making people vanish. That is something Henry discovered in the late 1990s when he and his friend Paul drove through the deserts of New Mexico. They had been driving for hours without seeing another car when they spotted a hitchhiker up ahead. The man looked young, maybe in his early 20s, carrying a small backpack and holding out his thumb. Against his better judgment, Henry pulled over. Paul muttered that it was a bad idea, but Henry insisted it was fine. The hitchhiker introduced himself as Luke. He was quiet, polite, and seemed grateful for the ride. They asked where he was headed, and he simply said west. Hours passed with little conversation. Then as the desert night grew colder, Luke spoke again. "Do you ever feel like the road goes on forever?" he asked softly. Neither Henry nor Paul replied. Something about his voice felt off. When Henry finally glanced at him in the rear-view mirror, he nearly swerved. Luke was staring straight at him, unblinking. His mouth stretched into a faint smile. Henry tried to laugh it off, telling himself he was imagining things, but the unease grew. After another mile, Paul leaned close and whispered, "He has not blinked once since we picked him up." Henry checked again. Paul was right. Luke's eyes remained fixed, wide and glassy. Finally, Henry said they were stopping for gas soon, hoping Luke would get out when they pulled into a small station. Henry excused himself to use the restroom. When he returned, both Paul and Luke were gone. Panic surged. He searched the lot, the bathroom, even asked the clerk inside if he had seen two men. The clerk looked confused and said Henry had arrived alone. He insisted no one else had been with him. Henry stormed out furious, certain it was some kind of cruel joke. But when he got back to his car, something made his blood freeze in the passenger seat. Paul's backpack was still there. His wallet, his phone, everything. But Paul himself had vanished. Henry waited for hours, calling out, searching the desert roadside until dawn. He never found Paul. Police later questioned him, suspecting foul play, but no evidence was ever discovered. As for Luke, there was no trace he had ever existed. Henry still drives today, but he never takes hitchhikers anymore. He never speaks of the night Paul disappeared, except to admit that every now and then, when driving through the desert at night, he swears he sees someone walking along the shoulder, thumb out, smiling. Then there are the times when the road itself seems determined to lead you somewhere you are not supposed to go. Emma and her cousin Rachel were driving home from a concert in rural Ohio when their GPS suddenly rerouted them onto a narrow country road. They assumed it was just a shortcut, but the longer they drove, the stranger things became. The road grew darker, Lined with thick woods on both sides, the GPS kept instructing them to continue straight. But the map no longer showed any nearby towns. At first they laughed it off, saying they were probably overreacting. But after nearly 40 minutes, they realized they had not passed a single house or car. The woods pressed closer, the branches reaching like fingers across the narrow road. Then, without warning, the GPS announced, "You have arrived." The car fell into silence. There was nothing around them, no buildings, no lights, no destination. Just a dead stretch of road swallowed by trees. Emma tried turning around, but the road had become so narrow it was nearly impossible. As she struggled, Rachel gasped and pointed ahead. In the distance, barely illuminated by the headlights, stood a figure. It was small, childlike, standing perfectly still in the middle of the road. Emma slammed on the brakes. The figure did not move. Rachel begged her to back up, but as Emma shifted into reverse, the GPS repeated the same words in a distorted mechanical voice. "You have arrived." They backed up as quickly as possible, heartbeats pounding in their throats when they finally found the main road again. Emma threw the GPS onto the floor, refusing to look at it. Neither of them spoke the rest of the drive. Later that week, Rachel tried to retrace their path on a map, but she could not find the road they had taken. It did not exist. The scariest thing about road trips is not knowing what waits in the darkness just beyond your headlights. You might think you are safe inside your car, that the miles rolling by are empty and harmless. But then you remember the faces at deserted gas stations, the strangers who never blink, the roads that lead nowhere. And you realize the nightmare is not about what you see. It is about what you almost see. What waits for you just out of reach, just out of time, waiting for you to make the wrong turn. The thing about highways is that they lull you into a rhythm. Long stretches of road blur together. The sound of tires on pavement becomes hypnotic, and before long you begin to forget how vulnerable you really are. That is exactly what happened to Brian and his friend Kyle during their late-night drive through rural Montana. They had been on the road for hours, their conversation fading into silence as exhaustion set in. Around 2 in the morning, Kyle spotted a dim light up ahead. "Finally, a rest stop," he muttered. But when they pulled off, what they found was anything but comforting. The place looked abandoned. The restrooms were boarded up. The vending machines were shattered, and weeds pushed through cracks in the pavement. Yet in the center of the lot, under a single flickering light, sat one lone car. Its doors were shut, its windows dark. Brian and Kyle debated whether to keep driving, but Brian desperately needed to stretch his legs. He stepped out, inhaling the cold night air. That was when he noticed the car's engine was running. At first he thought nothing of it. Maybe someone was asleep inside. But as he passed, he glanced through the window. The driver's seat was empty. The back seat was empty. There was no one inside. Yet the engine continued to hum. Steady and low, he hurried back to his own car, urging Kyle that they needed to leave immediately. As they pulled out of the lot, Brian looked back. The car's headlights suddenly turned on. Blazing through the dark, the vehicle lurched forward, following them onto the highway. What began as mild unease soon became outright terror. No matter how fast they drove, the mysterious car matched their speed. When Brian switched lanes, the car switched lanes. When he tried to slow down, it slowed down. Its headlights never dimmed, flooding their rearview mirror with harsh, blinding light. They drove like that for nearly 20 minutes, until at last Kyle shouted for him to take an exit. Brian swerved off, tires screeching. The pursuing car stayed right behind. The exit led to a narrow, twisting road through the hills. Brian floored it, heart pounding as the strange car kept up. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. One moment it was in the mirror, the next there was nothing. Just empty road stretching back into the darkness. They pulled over, shaken and breathless, trying to convince themselves it had been real. But when they finally reached the next town and stopped for gas, the clerk looked at them strangely. "You saw it too, huh?" he said when they asked what he meant. The clerk only shook his head and muttered, "Happens sometimes out here. Folks see things on the road that do not belong." Neither Brian nor Kyle ever drove that route again. For some travelers, the horror comes not from what follows them, but from what waits up ahead. Claire and her fiancé David were driving through Louisiana late one night. their route cutting through swampy backroads. The air was thick, the night buzzing with insects, and their GPS kept losing signal. After an hour of confusion, they spotted lights in the distance. Relieved, they assumed it was a small town, but when they reached it, they realized something was terribly wrong. The town looked frozen in time. Neon signs flickered over shuttered storefronts. Rusted cars lined the streets, and yet there was not a single person in sight. David slowed the car, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Where is everyone?" Claire whispered. They drove past a diner with half-eaten meals still on the tables, coffee cups tipped over, as if the people inside had left in a hurry. Every building looked abandoned, yet lived in at the same time. As they crept through the town square, they saw movement at last. In the glow of a street lamp, a figure appeared, a man, tall and thin, wearing a brimmed hat pulled low. He stood perfectly still, watching them. David rolled down his window to call out, but Claire grabbed his arm. The man had started walking toward them, slowly, deliberately. His steps echoing against the empty buildings. David hit the gas, swerving around him, desperate to get out, but the road twisted and turned, looping them back into the square again and again. Each time, the man was there, closer than before. Finally, in a blind panic, David turned off the headlights and barreled down an unmarked road, praying it would lead them out. After several minutes of reckless driving, they burst out of the trees and found themselves back on the highway. The town was gone. No sign of buildings, no lights, no man. Just endless swamp stretching into the night. For years after, Claire would dream about that figure, the way he moved with such unsettling calm, as if he knew they would never really leave. Other nightmares come from the people you trust. Take Adam's story, for example. He was hitchhiking his way across the Midwest when a friendly couple in their 40s picked him up. They seemed kind, offering him food and conversation. For the first hour, everything felt normal. But then Adam noticed they kept asking him oddly personal questions. Where his family lived, whether anyone was expecting him, if he had told anyone where he was going. When he answered vaguely, their smiles faltered. The woman reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a map. Unfolding it across her lap, Adam glanced down and saw that several routes had been marked in red, each circling remote, isolated locations. His gut twisted. Something was wrong. He excused himself, saying he needed to use a restroom, and asked them to stop at the next gas station. Reluctantly, they agreed. When they pulled in, Adam grabbed his backpack and bolted inside. Refusing to get back in the car, he explained the situation to the clerk, who took one look at the couple still waiting outside and whispered, "Stay here until they leave." Adam watched from the safety of the store as the couple sat in the car for nearly 20 minutes, never coming inside, never speaking, just staring at the building. Finally, without warning, they drove off. Adam never saw them again. But he often wonders what those red circles on the map really meant. The open road promises freedom, but freedom always comes with risk. You never know who is out there with you, what places you might stumble into, or what waits in the shadows just beyond the reach of your headlights. And sometimes the scariest part is not the people, or the towns, or even the strange cars that follow you. Sometimes the scariest part is realizing the road itself may not want to let you go. The rain had been relentless all afternoon, hammering the windshield with a steady rhythm that made the world outside look like it was melting. Daniel gripped the wheel tighter, his wipers working furiously to clear his vision as the two-lane highway wound deeper into the mountains of Colorado. He had left late, later than he should have, and now the storm had turned the road into a slick ribbon of black. His girlfriend Megan sat curled up in the passenger seat, dozing fitfully beneath a blanket as the daylight drained away. Daniel realized they had not seen another car in over an hour. The road felt endless, twisting into nowhere, lined with looming pine trees that leaned over the asphalt like sentinels. The GPS flickered, then failed completely, leaving them alone with nothing but road signs pointing to towns they had never heard of. When Megan stirred awake, she asked groggily where they were. Daniel admitted he was not sure. "As long as we keep heading east, we will find the highway again," he said, though he was trying harder to convince himself than her. Then, in the middle of a long stretch with no turnoffs, the car shuddered. The engine coughed once, twice, then died. Daniel guided it to the shoulder, heart sinking as the rain pelted down harder. They were stranded. He tried the ignition again and again. But nothing. The headlights dimmed and went dark. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hiss of rain on metal. Megan sat up straighter, her eyes wide now, nerves already raw from the isolation. "Call someone," she said. Daniel checked his phone, but the screen showed no signal. Megan's phone was dead. They sat in silence, listening to the storm, trying to decide what to do. After a long debate, Daniel suggested they wait until morning. They locked the doors, pulled the blanket tighter around themselves, and tried to sleep, but sleep never came. It began with the sound of footsteps, soft at first, muffled by the rain, but unmistakable. Someone was walking along the side of the car. Daniel sat up instantly, straining his eyes through the rain-streaked window. A figure was moving slowly around them. Circling, he could not make out details, just the outline of someone tall, with shoulders that seemed hunched at odd angles. Megan grabbed his arm, whispering, "Do not move." They sat frozen as the figure paused by the driver's window just inches away. The shape leaned closer, and Daniel caught the faint reflection of pale skin, a face too long, too narrow. The figure dragged something sharp across the glass, slow, deliberate. A sound like nails on a chalkboard cut through the storm. Daniel's first instinct was to start the car, but the key turned uselessly in the ignition. The figure moved again, slowly around the front of the car, then to the passenger side. Megan clutched the door handle as if to hold it shut. Another long scrape of metal against glass echoed, then silence. Minutes stretched into eternity. Finally, Daniel reached for the flashlight in the glove box, clicked it on, and shined it through the windshield. The beam illuminated nothing but rain and empty road. The figure was gone, but when he lowered the light, he saw them, handprints, dozens of them, smeared across the windshield. The hood, the side windows, each print was elongated, the fingers too long, too thin. They had not been there before. They stayed awake the rest of the night, too afraid to move. When dawn finally came, the car started as if nothing had ever been wrong. They drove in silence, desperate to reach civilization, but Megan swore she could still see the handprints faintly imprinted in the fog on the back window, slowly fading as the miles stretched on. Some stories end when the road is left behind. Others follow you like ghosts clinging to the bumper. That is what happened to Jason when he drove through rural Texas. He had been delivering furniture for work, his van loaded with boxes, when he decided to take a shortcut. The road was marked on his map, but when he turned onto it, the pavement quickly gave way to dirt. Trees arched overhead, blocking out the fading light, and the deeper he drove, the more uneasy he felt. Then he saw it. A woman standing by the roadside, her dress white and soaked with mud. She raised her hand as if to flag him down, against his better judgment. Jason stopped and rolled down the window. "Do you need help?" he called. The woman nodded but said nothing. Her face was pale, her hair clinging to her skin in wet strands. Jason offered to call someone, but when he glanced at his phone, he saw there was no service. The woman stepped closer, her hand brushing the van's door. Her fingers left streaks of mud on the glass. Jason panicked and threw the van into gear, speeding off without looking back. But the nightmare had only begun miles later. Jason glanced into his rearview mirror and froze. The woman was in the back of the van, crouched low among the boxes. Her pale face stared back at him. Eyes hollow and unblinking, he swerved wildly, nearly running off the road, then slammed the brakes. He jumped out, flinging the van's doors open, but the boxes were undisturbed. The woman was gone. Jason never told anyone at work what had happened, but he sold the van a week later. He claimed he could still smell mud inside, even after it had been scrubbed clean. Then there is the story of Lisa and her brother Eric, whose cross-country drive turned into a nightmare they will never forget. They had been traveling through Nevada, the desert stretching endlessly around them. When they stopped at a small roadside diner, the place was nearly empty, save for one old man sitting in the corner. He watched them intently the entire time they ate, never speaking, never looking away. When they finally left, Lisa noticed the man was gone. She brushed it off as coincidence, until they got back on the road and saw headlights in the mirror. A car was following them. At first it stayed far back, but as the miles passed, it grew closer, tailing them with unnatural precision. Eric sped up, the car sped up. He slowed down, the car slowed down. After nearly 30 minutes of this, Eric pulled suddenly onto a dirt road. Hoping to lose their pursuer, They drove fast, the desert rushing by in a blur, but when they looked back, the headlights were gone. Relieved, they turned around to rejoin the highway. That was when Lisa gasped. The old man from the diner was standing in the middle of the road. Waiting for them, Eric swerved, narrowly avoiding him. But when they looked in the mirror, the road behind them was empty again. They drove until sunrise, refusing to stop, both too shaken to speak. Neither of them ever returned to Nevada. The road has a way of swallowing people whole, of bending time and space until you are no longer sure where you are, or if you will ever find your way back. And sometimes, what you find on those roads does not want you to return. The night was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that unsettles you more than any loud noise ever could. Trees lined the old country road, their branches bending over the asphalt, as if trying to swallow the path whole. The headlights cut through the darkness, but only just enough to keep the driver aware of what lay directly ahead. Beyond that thin beam of light, the night was alive with possibilities, and not all of them good. A car approached from the opposite direction, its high beams blinding for a brief moment. As the two vehicles passed, the driver noticed something strange. The other car had only one headlight working, but more disturbing was the glimpse of the driver inside. Their face was pale, gaunt, almost skeletal, and though it lasted no more than a second, it felt as though the stranger had been staring directly into the soul of anyone who dared to look. The car sped by and vanished into the night, leaving only a fleeting unease behind. Yet that unease was enough to linger. The driver tried to shake it off, focusing back on the road, but the air felt heavier now. That brief glance had changed the mood of the journey completely. It was as though something had followed, even though the road behind was empty. The silence in the car grew oppressive, broken only by the steady hum of the tires. The driver turned on the radio, hoping to fill the void, but static crackled through the speakers. No station came in clearly, only the faint suggestion of voices lost in distortion, whispers that felt almost intentional. The driver turned the dial quickly and shut it off, deciding that silence was better than whatever that was. Another mile down the road, a figure appeared on the shoulder. At first it looked like a hitchhiker, thumb out, head low, dressed in a dark hoodie. The driver slowed down slightly, more out of instinct than intent to stop. Something about the figure did not sit right. Its posture was wrong, too stiff, too still. As the car drew nearer, the hitchhiker raised their head. The hood slipped back, revealing a face drained of color with eyes too wide, unblinking. The driver accelerated immediately, passing the figure without another thought. Yet as the headlights swept over it, the face seemed to change. For just an instant it appeared familiar, almost like the reflection of the driver's own features twisted into something grotesque. The rearview mirror confirmed the worst suspicion. The figure was no longer on the shoulder. It stood in the middle of the road, facing the car as it sped away. And even as distance grew, it did not shrink from view. It was as if the figure refused to fade, lingering in vision far longer than should have been possible. The driver finally adjusted the mirror, forcing themselves not to look again. The image haunted them regardless. Etched into memory, soon exhaustion set in. Road trips often blurred time and distance, but this one felt endless. The driver checked the dashboard clock and frowned. The numbers made no sense. It claimed only 5 minutes had passed since leaving the last gas station. Yet, they had been driving for nearly an hour. Confused, the driver tapped the clock, but the digits flickered, rearranged, and then froze completely. With no choice but to rely on intuition, the driver pressed forward, though unease grew with each passing second. The road narrowed further, forcing slower speeds. The trees seemed closer now, their branches scraping against the roof with sharp, jagged sounds like nails across a chalkboard. The driver tightened their grip on the wheel. Then through the noise came something else, faint footsteps. At first they seemed impossible, surely just the sound of branches snapping. But no, the rhythm was too deliberate, too human. It came from outside, pacing the car as though someone was running just beyond the glow of the headlights. The driver refused to look out the window, instinct warning them against it. The sound continued, matching speed perfectly, as if whatever was out there was not bound by the limitations of flesh and bone. Desperate, the driver floored the accelerator, pushing the car faster, faster. For a moment the footsteps faded, swallowed by the roar of the engine. Relief washed over. until something slammed against the side of the car. The impact was hard enough to shake the vehicle but left no dent when checked later. Panic took full control. The driver knew one thing: stopping was not an option. A sign appeared ahead, glowing faintly in the headlights. It read "Rest Area 2 miles." Relief returned. Thin but present. A place with lights, maybe other people, maybe safety. The car barreled forward, engine whining. 2 miles felt like forever. But eventually the entrance came into view. A small lot, a few dim lamps, and a building with restrooms and vending machines. Empty, but better than the endless dark road. The driver pulled in, parked under the brightest lamp, and finally allowed themselves to breathe. Silence pressed down again. Heavier than before, the driver sat in the car, trying to decide whether to venture out. Every instinct said no, yet sitting there exposed felt equally dangerous. Finally they stepped out, stretching stiff legs, forcing calm. The night air was cold, unnaturally so, their breath visible in thick clouds. The lamps buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow. Then came the sound, footsteps again echoing faintly across the lot. The driver spun, but no one was there. Only shadows stretched long across the pavement. The restroom door creaked open slightly. Moving on its own, light flickered inside. Dim and unreliable, against better judgment, the driver approached, each step deliberate. The door swung wider, inviting. Inside, the smell was sharp, metallic like rust or old blood. The driver hesitated but entered. The flickering bulb overhead revealed cracked tiles, smeared stains, and mirrors so fogged they reflected only vague shapes. From one of the stalls came a faint scratching sound, nails dragging against the door. The driver's pulse thundered, every instinct screaming to leave, and yet curiosity rooted them in place. The scratching stopped, silence stretched. Then the stall door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing inside, nothing but darkness. The driver exhaled shakily, turning to leave, but the mirror caught their attention. In its foggy surface, their reflection stared back, but the eyes were not their own. They were wide, unblinking and wrong. The lights went out. The driver stumbled back into pitch blackness, fumbling for the exit, but the door would not open. It felt sealed, immovable. The scratching sound returned, this time from every stall surrounding them. Dozens of nails against wood closing in. The driver pounded on the door, desperate, until suddenly the lights flickered back on. The restroom was empty. The stalls were open. The mirror showed only their normal reflection. The door swung open, easily shaking. The driver fled to the car, heart hammering, breath ragged. The engine roared to life, tires screeched, and the rest area disappeared into the night. Behind them, in the rearview mirror, the pale hitchhiker stood at the edge of the lot, still watching. The car sped down the highway, as if the very shadows themselves were chasing it. The driver's knuckles turned white against the steering wheel. Each mile stretching into eternity, the pale hitchhiker's image lingered in memory, too vivid to dismiss as imagination. The sense of being followed refused to fade. And though the road stretched endlessly ahead, it felt as though escape was an illusion. Eventually, exhaustion demanded surrender. Another rest stop appeared in the distance, larger than the last, with a few trucks parked under the glow of sodium lamps. The driver pulled in reluctantly, relieved by the presence of other vehicles. Perhaps the safety of numbers would be enough to keep whatever had haunted them at bay. They parked at the far edge of the lot, close to the restroom building, and tried to steady their breathing. This time, though, the silence of the night was different. It was not oppressive. It was expectant, like something waiting for a cue to make itself known. The driver decided against sleeping in the car. Instead, they walked toward the restroom. The building was newer, clean brick walls, bright lights humming overhead. It felt almost normal, almost safe. The driver splashed water on their face, gripping the sink to reassure themselves that they were still grounded in reality. Then in the mirror, they noticed it again. Not the pale hitchhiker this time, but something else behind their reflection. Standing in the far corner of the restroom was a man in a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat. Motionless watching, they spun around. The restroom was empty, nothing but the echo of dripping water, yet when they looked back in the mirror, the man was still there, closer now, his face obscured entirely by shadow. The driver's breath caught in their throat. They refused to look away, convinced that if they did, the figure would be standing directly behind them. But the mirror image shifted on its own. The figure tilted its head slowly, unnaturally, as though studying them. Then, without warning, the bulb overhead shattered. The restroom plunged into darkness, shards raining down like glass rain. The driver fled blindly, pushing through the door and into the cold night. Their heart pounded as they stumbled back to the car. Fumbling with the keys, finally inside, doors locked. Engine running, they sat trembling. The trucks were still parked across the lot. But now the drivers seemed absent. Their cabins were dark. No movement inside, and then it struck. The lot was too still. Even with several large vehicles parked there, the silence was complete. No idling engines, no shifting weight, no sound of sleep-breathing men, just silence. One truck caught the driver's eye, its headlights flicked on without warning. Beams cutting across the lot, the engine roared to life, but no one sat in the driver's seat. Slowly, the truck began to roll forward, massive wheels crunching gravel. It turned, aligning itself toward the car, lights glaring like unblinking eyes. The driver panicked, slamming the gear shift into reverse, backing away wildly. The truck accelerated, tires screeching, bearing down with unstoppable force. At the last second, the driver spun the wheel, swerving out of the lot and back onto the highway. Behind them, the truck followed, relentless. The chase lasted for miles. The driver pushed the car to its limits, weaving along the dark road. But the truck stayed close, always just behind. Always too close, its horn blared, an endless scream tearing through the night. The headlights filled the rearview mirror, burning into vision. Finally, in desperation, the driver took an exit ramp, swerving sharply onto a smaller road. The truck barreled past, unable to follow in time, its roar fading into the distance. Relief was short-lived, though. The road the driver now found themselves on was worse. Narrow, winding, surrounded by forest, no streetlights, no signs of life. Only shadows pressing in from every side, minutes stretched like hours. Then the forest broke, revealing a small bridge over a river. The wooden planks creaked beneath the car's weight, but it held halfway across. The headlights flickered and died. The car coasted to a stop in utter blackness. Panic surged, but before the driver could restart the engine, a sound drifted through the night. Laughter, not loud but soft, carried on the breeze, childlike but wrong. Too hollow, too distorted, it seemed to come from beneath the bridge. The driver froze, straining to listen. The laughter grew louder, closer, joined by whispers too faint to understand. The car shuddered, as though something heavy moved beneath it. Rocking the planks, the driver fumbled with the ignition. Desperate to start the car, the engine sputtered once, twice, then roared back to life. The headlights flared on. Relief lasted a heartbeat before horror took its place. Standing in the middle of the bridge, illuminated by the beams, were 3 children, or at least they looked like children. Their skin was pale, their eyes black pits, their mouths stretched into unnatural grins. They stood hand in hand. Blocking the way forward, the driver slammed the accelerator. The figures did not move. The car passed through them like mist. Yet the chill they left behind was bone deep. In the rearview mirror, the children still stood there, grinning wider, their forms slowly fading into the night. The driver did not slow down until the bridge was long behind. The road narrowed further. Twisting endlessly, signs appeared, but they were wrong. The letters were jumbled, words misspelled, arrows pointing in contradictory directions. One sign read home, with an arrow pointing both left and right. Another read safe, pointing straight toward a road that ended in nothing but forest. The driver ignored them, pressing forward blindly, until finally a glow appeared ahead. Not headlights this time, but a cluster of buildings. A small town. Relief surged again, civilization at last. But the closer they came, the stranger it became. The town looked frozen in time, like a relic from decades past. Gas pumps with glass globes, neon signs buzzing faintly, cars that belonged to another era. The streets were empty, yet every light was on. Storefronts glowed, televisions flickered through windows, but no people were visible. The driver pulled into the gas station. Stepping out cautiously, the air smelled stale, as though it had not moved in years. A bell above the station door jingled as they entered, but no clerk greeted them. Only shelves lined with goods long expired, labels faded, cans rusted. Then a sound cut through the silence. The bell jingled again, though the door had not moved. Slowly, the driver turned. A figure stood at the end of the aisle, back turned, wearing clothes that belonged in the 1950s. It turned its head unnaturally far, almost all the way around, revealing a face with empty sockets where eyes should have been. The driver bolted, sprinting back to the car. Fumbling with the keys, behind them, more figures emerged from the storefronts, all dressed in old-fashioned clothing. All with hollow faces, they stood in doorways, behind windows on rooftops, watching silently. The car roared to life, tires squealing. As the driver fled the town in the mirror, the figures remained unmoving until distance swallowed them. The road stretched on endlessly once again, as though the town had never existed. But the driver knew better. Some places were not meant to be found, and once stumbled upon, they never truly let go. The night pressed heavier, exhaustion returning with vengeance. The driver's eyes drooped, the lines of the road blurring. At last, unable to fight it, they pulled onto the shoulder. Promising only a brief rest, sleep came quickly, too quickly. Dreams filled with laughter, whispers, and hollow faces. When the driver jolted awake, heart racing, they found the car surrounded. Dozens of pale figures stood silently in the trees, their hollow eyes fixed directly on them. The headlights refused to turn on. The driver sat frozen, the steering wheel slick beneath their trembling hands. Outside the car, the pale figures lingered just beyond the tree line, their outlines shifting slightly as though the forest itself breathed with them. They made no sound, no movement, only stood, countless hollow eyes locked on the lone traveler. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the headlights still refused to turn on. Leaving the road ahead, swallowed in black, panic surged. But desperation forced action. The driver slammed the key again and again, the engine sputtering, coughing, then finally catching. The sudden roar shattered the silence, and for the first time the figures moved. Slowly, unnaturally, their heads tilted in unison. Their bodies stayed rigid, but their gazes sharpened, as though the noise had broken some unspoken pact. The driver shifted into gear and stomped the accelerator. Tires spun against gravel before catching, and the car lunged forward into the darkness. The road became a blur of shadow and motion. Branches arched overhead, clawing at the windshield as though trying to drag the vehicle back into the forest. The figures remained behind at first, growing smaller in the rearview mirror. Relief flickered for only a heartbeat before the driver saw them again. Not shrinking now, but keeping pace, their pale forms darting between the trees at impossible speed. They did not stumble, did not falter. They glided alongside the car as though tethered by some unseen rope. The driver pressed harder on the gas, the speedometer climbing, but the figures matched every increase, their faces ghost-like flashes between the trunks. Then, without warning, one figure burst onto the road directly ahead. The driver swerved violently, the car fishtailing before slamming back onto the asphalt. The figure had vanished, leaving only the echo of that hollow face burned into memory. The forest seemed alive now, branches twisting inward, narrowing the path, forcing the car deeper at last. A break in the trees revealed a diner glowing like a beacon. Its neon sign flickered red against the night. Open 24 hours. Relief surged like a lifeline. The driver pulled into the gravel lot. Screeching to a halt, the figures were gone, swallowed by the forest's edge. The diner's warm glow promised safety, or at least a reprieve inside. Yellow light spilled across checkered tiles. A jukebox humming softly in the corner. A waitress stood behind the counter, smiling as though nothing about the night had been unusual. Rough drive? She asked, voice warm, steady. The driver nodded mutely, sliding into a booth. Coffee arrived moments later, black and steaming. The waitress moved with a rhythm too precise, her smile fixed like it had been painted on. The driver sipped cautiously, scanning the room. The diner was empty. No other patrons, despite the late hour outside. The neon sign buzzed, its hum growing louder than it should have. The air felt heavy again, thick with anticipation. That was when the driver noticed the clock above the counter. Its hands didn't move, both were stuck at midnight. The second hand ticked back and forth between two notches, but never advanced. The driver glanced at their watch. The same frozen midnight, unease knotted in their stomach. They looked back to the waitress, whose smile had not changed. Long night, she said again. Word for word, tone identical. The driver blinked. Her lips had not moved. The coffee turned cold in their hand, though steam still rose from the cup. A shadow passed outside the window, pale and fast. Another figure, gliding across the lot, then another and another, circling the diner like wolves testing prey. The driver bolted upright. The waitress still stood, still smiling, frozen as though carved from wax, her reflection in the counter's chrome trim, though told another story in the warped shine. Her grin stretched too wide, teeth sharp and endless. The driver backed away, bumping into the booth. Knocking over the cold, hot coffee, they did not stay to see if she moved. The bell above the diner door screamed as they ran outside. The pale figures waited, dozens of them encircling the lot. Their hollow eyes reflected the neon glow. Empty yet aware, the driver jumped into the car. Slamming the lock, the engine coughed, then roared again. Headlights flared this time. Scattering shadows, the figures recoiled slightly. As though the light wounded them, hope surged. Tires spun gravel into the air as the car shot forward, breaking through the circle. Headlights slicing the dark for a while. The figures fell back, swallowed once again by the trees. The driver pushed forward, knuckles white, breath ragged. The highway stretched empty and endless. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time had lost its meaning entirely. Relief settled in like a fragile truce, but then on the horizon, headlights appeared, two bright beams. Approaching fast, finally another vehicle. The driver almost cried with relief, slowing slightly to signal for help. As the lights neared, though, something felt wrong. They were too high, too wide apart. Not a car, a truck. The same truck. The roar of its engine thundered across the asphalt. It barreled forward, horn blaring exactly as before. The driver swerved, heart pounding, but this time the truck did not pass. It slowed, matching pace, headlights glaring. Through the windshield, the driver saw nothing. No silhouette at the wheel. No driver at all, just emptiness. The truck loomed closer, nudging the car's bumper, herding it like prey. The driver slammed the accelerator, speed climbing dangerously, curves blurring past. The truck followed, relentless, until the road split suddenly into two paths, with no time to think. The driver swerved left, the forest swallowed them again. The truck did not follow. The silence returned, heavier than before. Relief came in shallow breaths, but dread still lingered. The road narrowed, rougher now, cracked pavement giving way to dirt. Trees bent unnaturally over the path, forming a tunnel that blocked the sky. The car's beams struggled against the darkness, swallowed before reaching far. The driver slowed reluctantly, afraid of what might wait yet unable to turn back. Branches scraped the roof like fingernails. Each sound twisting the silence tighter. At last the tunnel broke. Ahead loomed a motel, neon sign sputtering, vacancy. The building was squat, 2 stories. Doors lined up like watching eyes. A single bulb flickered above the office. It felt wrong, yet the exhaustion was unbearable. The driver parked reluctantly and stepped out. The night was cold, unnaturally so, breath clouding instantly inside the office. A man sat behind the desk, eyes hidden beneath a cap, voice low and gravelly. "One night?" he asked. The driver nodded. The key slid across the counter. Room number 6 scratched into the tag. The room smelled of mildew and stale smoke. Curtains hung heavy, carpet damp beneath worn shoes. The driver collapsed onto the bed, locking the door, bolting it for good measure. Sleep came in fits, restless, haunted by images of hollow eyes and twisted smiles. Then came a knock, soft at first, then louder, rhythmic. The driver froze, staring at the door. Another knock, 3 beats perfectly spaced, then silence. Minutes stretched, just as they began to relax. It came again, louder, harder. The knob rattled violently, the bolt held. Silence returned, and then from the bathroom, a whisper. It was their own voice, perfectly identical, calling their name. The driver's blood turned to ice. They stumbled back against the wall, staring at the bathroom door. Slowly, the knob turned. The door creaked open inch by inch, revealing only darkness. Then a hand emerged. Pale, long-fingered, nails blackened. The driver grabbed the lamp from the nightstand and hurled it. The glass shattered, sparks flaring, plunging the room into darkness. Panic overtook them. They fled, tearing the door open. Sprinting barefoot across the gravel lot, every room's curtains shifted as though unseen occupants pressed against them, watching. The driver reached the car, fumbling keys, scrambling inside. The engine caught, headlights stabbing the dark. In the rear view, the motel loomed, every curtain pulled back. Dozens of hollow faces pressed against the glass. Figures began to spill from the rooms. Pale and grinning, converging on the lot, tires screamed as the car tore away. Gravel spitting, the motel shrank in the mirror, but the figures followed, their shapes flickering in and out of the tree line, as though the night itself carried them forward. The driver did not stop, did not breathe. The road stretched on, endless, the headlights swallowing shadow after shadow. There was no destination anymore, only escape, but deep down, they knew the truth. Some roads never end, and some passengers you never leave behind.